and I'm going to introduce our next panelists, the final conversation of our Meadowlands experience. And we're talking about cannabinoids, terpenes, extracts, concentrates, and exploring the evolution of manufacturing. What's the difference between resin and rosin, sauce, shatter, what's up with dabbing? We have a killer lineup here today. I'm pleased to introduce Joseph Encinosa. He's the founder and CEO of Oakland-based concentrate company Gold Drop. Joe has dedicated the last 10 years of his career to innovation in the cannabis concentrate market. As a pioneer and expert in cannabis concentrates, Joe has created extractions and formulations that have earned Gold Drop more than 100 awards, including first place finishes at the Emerald Cup and the High Times Cannabis Cup. Welcome, Joe. Thanks for being here. Next, we have Tony Verzura, the founder of Blue River Terps, a solventless technology company that licenses their proprietary equipment and standard operating procedures to qualified state licensed manufacturers to create Blue River's trademark branded products. Tony is a cannabis inventor who has earned more than 80 cannabis awards for his farm-to-table approach to small batch rosins and sauces. Blue River uses advanced mechanical separation techniques for isolating cannabinoids, terpenes, and full spectrum extracts. Welcome, Tony. Last but not least, we have Roger Volodarsky, who's the CEO and founder of Puffco. Roger is a serial entrepreneur, tech fan, and cannabis connoisseur who is on a mission to make the highest level of consumption devices accessible, practical, and effective for everyone. Since 2013, Puffco has created the most awarded vaporizers and products. The Puffco Peak is a smart rig device designed to unlock the true power of concentrates, providing the clearest expression of the potency, flavor, and effects of the plant they're derived from with no learning curve. We got our own Puffco Peak for the Meadow office last Emerald Cup, and the candy paint is really makes it a fun way to smoke as a team. So welcome, everyone. This is not a moderated conversation, so we're just going to let the three of you riff and chat and ask each other questions, and this is very much a consumption-friendly space, so enjoy yourselves. And I'm going to pass it to Roger if you want to ask the first question of your fellow panelists.
Sure. Tony, Joe, who would have thought, guys? Certainly not me. Not when I met Joe on, I think, the side of I-5 5 or 6 years ago. Are you in here, Joey?
Yep, I'm here. Hey, what's up, Roger?
There he is. Good to see you guys. I'd love to just start by quickly asking you guys, how did this journey begin for you? Because I don't think I might know the answer of that for you, Joe, but definitely not for Tony. So let's start with you, Joe. How did you start down this crazy path?
Yeah, if we go way back, growing up, cannabis was actually kind of demonized for me. So I didn't really start actively using and engaging with cannabis until I was in college. And a lot of the myths were kind of dispelled all at once. My very successful dual majoring roommate was smoking all the time. And I started joining him. I ended up finding out that it helped me concentrate. I can kind of just zone into what I was doing, and taking, Adderall and Ritalin and things since I was like in second grade. I stopped. And I didn't realize how significant it was kind of at the time in the moment, but looking back, that was kind of my, I guess, first big switch. It was a big realization for me. And then I saw it help my grandfather, gave him a joint to smoke, even though he told me he doesn't smoke that shit, boy, while he's going through chemo. And I saw the changes it had on his experience with chemo, and gave him the ability to beat back his non-Hodgkin's lymphoma 3 times. And from there, kind of, I think, I knew that this was not going anywhere, and this was very real. And I felt an urge to be a part of that. My dad was growing. He'd been a lifelong smoker. All of a sudden, me and him, could relate again. And we started growing together. I started making hash in his kitchen. It evolved to me visiting friends out in California and seeing that this was really happening. This was very real. There were stores and there was products, and it was being taken seriously. So I moved out here and we started growing and started making concentrates. And I think I found a kind of a space in just, taking what's out there and coming up with new ways or just, delivering good products for people. And the rest is history.
Awesome. Thanks, Joey.
Yeah.
Tony, I want to ask you this, but I I'm starting to remember, we've been doing this for so long, I have so many things I forget. I'm starting to remember your post that you made about coming from Florida and what it means to have taken a chance. Joey's also from Florida. What it means to have taken a chance on something that's heavily stigmatized at the time that you were doing it. Really, this weird path that I'm sure your friends shunned you for, and it kind of worked out. And I think that's all of our stories. But I'm sure everybody would love to hear yours too, Tony. How did you become Tony Blue River?
Thanks for having me, guys. Good to see you as well, Roger. And I'm going to
Good to see
probably
you.
I'm going to turn the question around on you after I answer this, because I actually
Sure.
don't know your whole story either.
Cool.
I actually started long time ago. I think I was like predestined to be the black sheep of the family. And we once upon a time went on a European vacation with my brothers, where my dad, I'm firstborn Italian in this country. And he said, you know, you got two ways in life. You could learn with the books, or you could learn on the streets. And he dropped us off in the streets in Europe and said, see ya. And about 4 months later, he joined us. And on that journey, one of my first experiences within 12 hours of landing in London was smoking Sputnik hash with some skunk bud and a little hash joint. So I started right away smoking concentrates as the first time when I was 16. Then by the time I left that journey, I had grabbed some skunk seeds and was told I was going to be arrested trying to get them in. But I got them in, and a few years later went to college, and always thought about that time, but never thought it was like something that was possible, because it was illegal. And when I was in Amsterdam in that time and in Europe, I just had a different, you know, I was a kid and a different mentality. And I didn't really think that it was like a possibility. And then at some point I got into a really bad car wreck, and different things that happened to me. Some of my buddies were growers. I started growing because the doctors kind of put me on opiates at the time. This was 1994, 95. So I actually started as a grower, because I spent about 6 months on that crap, and couldn't eat, couldn't go to the bathroom, couldn't sleep. And I realized from a friend of mine he was kind of a roaming hippie, but back in that time, I think it was like blueberry and Santa Cruz blueberry maybe came around. I mean, it was $60 an eighth by the time I went from west to east, maybe even more, to be honest.
Sure.
This was in the 90s. So he said, man, you got to knock that shit off, because you're never going to deal with that pain and sleep, dealing with that stuff. And so I started smoking cannabis, and I started growing it. And then I started making cannabis butter and putting it on everything that I had, toast, and making little oils and trying to make infusions. I made Quizzo with ethanol and scissor hash and things like this. I even took stainless steel bowls, would boil them with water, throw like the sift on it, and try to press it with a spoon and then scrape it. It was kind of the first rosin. I would say that was like 96, 98. And then I had an opportunity when Colorado went medical to join forces with a crew there, and was still just a grower. I had a lot of respect for like Nicotine, Giddy, Kind Bill, the guys that were doing a lot of live resin, the first fresh rosin with live resin. So I didn't really get introduced to any kind of water hash or solventless until Nicotine. And so that was in Colorado.
Shout out to Nick, man.
Yeah, man.
Definitely a pioneer.
For real. I heard Isolator bags, Mila, Bubbleman, things like this, but they weren't in my world.
Sure.
So the first person to hand me full melt, 6-star, 5-star melt, was Nicotine. So
I'm trying to think if I have the same story, and I not same story, but he might have been my first also. Shout out to Nick, man. He really created an entire industry.
So I mean, there was a time and a place where everything was indoor and whole plant. We did our first greenhouses in Denver, and a lot of brands were built back then. But I learned very quickly through rare dankness and DNA and different types of companies that we were working with at the time, that genetics was key, you know, and people really just don't put a lot of emphasis on that. And so that's like, it all starts with the genetics and what's the resin profile. And then the rest of it is really artisanal, a cross between artisanal and science. And so we, you know, the first 25 awards or so was not in Colorado, was not, there was maybe 10 or 5 to 10 that were like started to be solventless, but it wasn't until I got to California. Once it went from medical to adult use, believe it or not, I said, fuck that. I'm not into the adult use market. And I actually went to California for the medical market because I felt it was the last stand. So I was, I would say, influenced mostly by the D'Angelos, in the sense that I left everything in Colorado. Took some things, some ideas public that didn't really jive with me. So I had my first like ideas and like how to like make capsules and topicals and sublinguals, and did my first set of patents that way. But when once I went to California, it all kind of changed. Those guys gave me a space, they gave me a home, didn't even have to pay rent or anything. Those guys kind of put me on the map when I had nothing, let me do my thing there at Harborside. And I met Joe, and it was actually Tim who was one of the buyers there. I started doing cannabis terpenes in 2014, 2015, I got really obsessed with, I would say, solventless, only because I kind of went broke a few times. So I had a necessity and innovation. I was like, what can I do without any money? And it was hair irons with a bald guy, right?
Yeah, I know all about it, bud.
Yeah, hair irons, and like, how do I make something of myself? And
Sure.
I started making terpenes, and somebody said, hey, you got to go meet this guy, Joe from Gold Drop, because I think the two of you guys would get along. You're both from Florida. And I was like a little lost puppy, to be honest with you. And I met Joe at a little taco place. And the only thing I had was like vials of clear, solventless, full spectrum cannabis terpenes. And so obviously Joe's eyes lit up, and he was like, oh, let me get some of those terps. What can we do? And so the two of us got together, and
And I asked you, where's the rest of it?
Yeah, that's true. You said,
Good
where's
question.
the rest of it? And I said, what do you mean? And we both came together, and we said, how can we maximize every milligram and every essential oil from this plant without wasting it and without contributing back into the environment? And so the first ventures, like, we won probably like at least 25 awards. It was a really good friendship and a really good ride, in the sense that we started using cannabis terpenes themselves to isolate CBD and THCA and all of these different compounds. And so we started winning a lot of CBD awards together, because we realized that we didn't need heptane and hexane and pentane and all these chemicals, that we could use I would say the true solvents, because everyone argues terpenes are solvents, but
Yep.
they're a group of hydrocarbons. And so we use the natural plants hydrocarbons found in those terpene bases. Remember, there's monoterpenes and sesquiterpenes, different groups based on fresh, frozen, and cured. And at that time, we were experimenting, and Joe, lo and behold, showed me a dish one day of these little things that he said, what did you do to the oil? And I said, I don't know what you mean. And he was like, check it out, bro. And it was little tiny crystals that were growing in his oil. And over the day, this was at a cannabis cup, and in the sun over the day, it was just, all of a sudden he was like, dude, check this thing out. I'm like, what is going on? And he was like, check this out. And that was the start of the idea of how do we utilize what's in the plant to make extracts and things like that. And then the boom of, I started selling cannabis terpenes worldwide, which later found out ran into some legal ramifications of analog derivative of a controlled substance, whether it has THC or CBD, is deemed illegal. So even cannabis terpenes, THC free, is illegal. Trust me, 17 charges.
Cannabinoid free.
Cannabinoid free terpenes from real cannabis. I had 17 different issues, let's just put it that way, which forced me once again to start over and reinvent myself into solventless extracts.
Damn, pretty crazy, man. Yeah, very comprehensive story. Did I hear that correctly, that you were really just focused on extracting terps, and then Joey comes along and is like, well, where's the rest of the material? There's definitely stuff to be had from that. I didn't know that. I didn't know that you guys were building on top of each other that way. I thought it was just like a convenient friendship because you were doing something and he was doing like this other part of it.
No, everyone thought there was some weird, like, cold trapping, strange thing. It was, I removed terpenes, I gave byproduct to Joseph. Joe then removed the cannabinoids and we put them back together. And that's how it started.
For those here that are like either new to the space or haven't been to all these cannabis cups and emerald cups and all these things, I don't know that there has been a Blue River Gold Drop cart that didn't win first place at anything that they were going for. It was the only thing you'd see in that category, I would argue, for at least 3 years. So like, this was the most innovative product around. It was the first time I think people were trying to really recreate the experience of dabbing in this really like archaic tech, like the hardware just wasn't great at the time.
Yeah.
And so these were two guys that were doing something that I would argue shouldn't have to be done, but they were they were growing and modifying cannabis to fit hardware and give people an experience that just was not possible before. And I think that shouldn't be the case because Puffco has big aspirations for, making sure that hardware works around cannabis and not vice versa. But
we were doing it, kind of before you came in and provided that platform. Yeah, we really had to work around kind of the tools that we had at hand back then, and we definitely build on each other. Tony's using the terpene for separate, or like that kind of that terpene, using it to isolate CBD, and those separations started inspiring him into these deconstructions that then started inspiring me on the hydrocarbon side to use a lot of those same principles. So we've definitely have built upon each other, and it's been a pleasure knowing Tony.
I'm curious.
I want to say one thing to that before Roger, because I do think you revolutionized consumer consumption of all extracts, not just rosin, but like everyone's extracts. It was this and this before Roger, really. And this is very complicated. And for the average person coming into the industry, like it looks like you're doing some kind of weird drug, and it just
definitely.
Then it turned into this.
Well, right? Roger, when his first things that he released were, the early Puffcos. Before that, it was the globes were kind of around, and those things just like they looked awful, and they were.
And you broke them every day.
And yeah, they were just the worst. And I remember, seeing Roger at these events, and you wanting oil just so you can then use, like, I need to know how that functions in my device. So you were taking pieces of our oil as it was evolving, and you were evolving a product alongside of the oil that was evolving. And I had the pleasure of, knowing Roger when the Puffco was like a glimmer in his eye, seeing. Yeah,
you followed us. Yeah, you followed us and liked our pictures, and I'm like, oh my God, there's like this concentrate company in California that sees what we're doing. We're a 2-person company at this point.
I remember.
With like very little visibility, and I just hit you up like, can I meet you?
Shout out to Chelsea.
And shout out to Chelsea, and we just met on the side of the road and just talked about the future of cannabis and what will happen. And
we went and grabbed lunch.
I don't remember where it was. I know it was like
a little Italian place we randomly found, and just to sit down and eat.
But I remember talking about what we thought the future of cannabis would be. And I feel like that's what we both kind of saw play out with people doing their best to mimic in a portable fashion what's happening with dabbing. And it was a big part of my history. I didn't know that moment was going to be a big part of my history, but it certainly was.
And
I guess
we
so. Like,
didn't even plan this. The three of us on this panel. This was random.
no, I had no idea.
Random.
Totally random.
I found
So
out
when I
about
saw
this
your
like a
name
week
and I
ago.
saw Joe's, I was like, this is too funny.
Yeah, two guys that I know well who I've definitely annoyed for hash of multiple cannabis cups over the years.
Well, I will want to add one thing that before Roger and when I first started with Joe, I was like, since 2014, I kind of had a chip on my shoulder a little bit about, and I wanted to ask Joe this in the sense, remember when it was just all botanical, like plant-based?
The botanical? Yeah.
Like I'm still, what's your thoughts on that? And like, how it went from, that's what I felt that's what I was pushing hard for. Let's get real cannabis effects and modulation effects into your oil. And that's all you had, right?
Right. So in the beginning, of distillates kind of emerging, there was, the clear had kind of come to market with distillate, and it was just in a jar, and you dabbed it. They were adding, non-cannabis derived flavoring or terpenes, and it wasn't really disclosed at the time. Kind of had backlash from people because they didn't know. When we, introduced it, our stance was from the beginning was we observed that and said, hey, look, you just got to have the conversation up front. This is what we're doing. This is what this is. Let's talk about it. And then you can make the decision. At the time, distillate, the highest purity and the most abundant, like clean, source of cannabinoids that you can come across, because you were turning just about anything, let's say, into it. Although the better the input, the better the outcome. That abundant source of affordable cannabinoids didn't have a pairing in terpenes. So plant-derived terpenes from other plants that, terpenes happen long ago in the evolution of plants. Later on, one of the branches of the family tree started producing cannabinoids in abundance, and we love that plant. But terpenes are shared amongst, almost all plants on the planet. They use it for a variety of functions, pests, fungus, all kinds of beneficial uses. So getting those abundant, cheap terpenes and using them was the only option we had. Now, when I met Tony and I saw, whoa, these are terpenes from cannabis. These are the isolated terpenes. This is what we're looking for. And what are you doing with that material? Because those cannabinoids are still there. If at the end of the day, you're going to.
Oh, by the way, I was throwing it away.
Yeah. I said,
Crazy.
Give me that. You called it soulless bud. And I said, give it to me. The soul's still there. And
I did. I was like, well, and as Frenchie probably knows, and people like when you wash the material after you're done with it, like you throw it away, like people,
sure.
So it wasn't like I didn't have that option,
I mean, rosin chips make some mean edibles, like nothing,
for sure.
Nothing should be thrown away.
2015 though.
I'm curious, especially because this is an extraction panel. Individually, what do you guys think has been the biggest leap in the past decade that deserves some recognition of like things used to be this way and then came this critical point and things seem to be different after that? I know that since I've come into the industry,
besides
not even from consumption for extraction, I feel like when I first jumped into the space, live resin was kind of just starting. Distillate had just hit the scene, was seen as like this very elite thing, like this purified. It's not the image that it has now of like this affordable commoditized solution. It was something new and brilliant, and then water hash started getting better, and then rosin started coming along. Like there's been so many, it felt like leaps. Felt like there was a point where it was year after year, there was something new to be excited about. Shatter used to matter, and that's not even close to a thing anymore. So in this past decade, what era, even if it's on a personal level of what pushed you forward, what was that year that you felt this changes shit and I will be a part of this change, if that exists?
I think I was gonna say there's probably three. Actual closed loop hydrocarbon extraction, like a true recovery system,
Okay.
that wasn't around. And and I don't extract with solvents, but I think that like to watch Joe, even in the last 5 years, and watch the industry. And I was in Colorado when I created what we called VPC, vac purge concentrates, and everyone laughed at me like, "Why are you vac purging anything?" And I would say the whole idea of, and that's really Indra and like other people before us that actually invented it, but the industry had a lot of fail tech and built a lot of machines that didn't meet standardization and safety protocols. So I have to give shout out, even though that's not my lane. I think in the last 10 years, for sure, recovery systems and hydrocarbon systems, and then I think terpenes, and then I think rosin.
Yeah, if I had to say it
Cool.
was one thing, one category that it's concentrates in general. They've seen it's been an explosion in development. All the way from allowing me and Tony, that closed loop development, the device development. All of us are here because concentrates evolved in the way they did. If you had to say one thing, it's been all these little things, but if we had to lump them up under some category umbrella, um, flower, well, the genetics and the breeding of flower, and I think ultimately that might have been helped along with concentrates, but that has definitely been something recent. But as an overall encompassing thing, I think concentrates. It went from just like hash, finger hash, scissor hash, bubble hash, maybe starting at bubble hash and the ice water hash. Boom.
Yeah, hard thing for people to use though, because when I was like, and I was
Totally.
only making bubble hat, and we were only making full melt, but then I was like, okay, we have to press it, we have to heat this, we got to wait for this exact window,
right? And that led to more innovation.
Then the innovation, that innovation of a device that where like you don't need to complicate this whole thing with timing, and there is a purpose for it. And there is a whole point to different temperatures and things like that, which you put into your device. But I really think that the concentrate world, as Joe's saying, couldn't evolve without the mechanism or, some kind of device. The devices had to evolve to allow the consumer easier usability. And I think it was this thing at the same time. So concentrates, I would agree with Joe. Just in general, like concentrates were like not a big selling thing. Like people were very like, there was still, I would say flowers were 90%, and then it was edibles, and now flowers are like 68%. Edibles are still very strong.
The concentrates have even evolved the edible game, because now the base ingredients for a lot of concentrates have changed with the evolution of concentrates.
Edibles now you can have edibles that taste like cannabis or don't taste like cannabis.
Right. Yeah, totally. I think our time is almost up, so I'll wrap on this question. Anybody that has questions for me, I'm actually going to jump on Instagram and do a live. My Instagram account is Jolly Roger, so you can come catch me on there. I'll keep answering questions because I know I didn't get the too many to me. Yeah, jump on if you want. But I'm curious to wrap on. What do you guys think is the future of concentrates? How do you see? I mean, we've all had this conversation years ago. How do you see? What do you think the next evolutionary steps will be that we will see play out in the industry, if any, or unless you think we've settled?
No, definitely not settled. I've made that mistake almost before, where I'm just like, okay, this is the basic vaporization device is here, and then here you come along. So while kind of the mechanics are simple, like a car and the four wheels and an engine, that concept isn't going to change much for a long time. Well, the car has drastically fucking evolved. So I think the concentrates will evolve in ways that we can't even think of yet. Ways that we might be just scratching the surface and exploring. I know we're playing a lot with isolations and straight THCA, HTEs, and just I'm excited to see what we do next. I don't know, but it's definitely gonna.
I would say that now that we've reached, it's not just about concentrates anymore. It's about building. So whether you're non-solvent or on the solvent side, both sides are able to now pull apart and keep things in their concentration form. So like THCA, THC, full spectrum terpenes. I started deconstructing things and then rebuilding things very specific to reduce fats and to be able to build designer dabs. And so I think the ability to do that, whether you're in Joe or you're myself, will help, I think, in a synergistic way with those different new evolutions of devices. And so I think it's important that we had to get to this point so that somebody else can say, you know what? Wow, somebody can make a oil that can do this, or a concentrate, like my trademark thing, the flan. It's like it took me 3 years of evolving to this like consistency that I say, this is what I would do with the tech when I got to that level, right? It's like, this is the level of purity and where I get. And so I didn't want to stop until I could get a solventless to 99% purity, removing lipids and waxes and designing something that I felt like was my perfect cue to what that would be if I were to make something. So once you get to that technology, it's like, what are you going to do with it? So that's kind of like my play now, is like when people follow Blue River, there's rosin, there's live rosin, dry sift rosin, but then there's like my signature shit that's like the Torreon, the jelly, the flan. This is the next evolution. This is like, okay, let's fucking make designer shit for crazy experiences with very unique flavors. And I know Joe's right there on that same path. And eventually I think somebody's going to come along and say, okay, now that the concentrate game's here, what can we do with it? And there'll be evolutions of more crazy stuff.
I want to know what Roger's going to do next.
Yeah, there's going to be stuff crazy.
You got a big announcement coming
There's
up
a reason
soon?
I've avoided any questions this whole time. We got a lot of
I know.
exciting shit
I
coming.
know. I still don't know this guy's story. All I know is that
that announcement. It's the 6th, right?
Yes. We have a product.
That's my
announcement
birthday.
on Tuesday.
Birthday.
Is it? Well, happy birthday, bud. You're about
Thanks,
to see
man.
a real treat come out that day.
What do you have?
We were dropping, I can't say what, but we're dropping something this upcoming week. So you guys will have to tune into the Puffco page to kind
If
of
anybody
see
wants
what
to know
that's
what
about.
to get me for my birthday, I don't know what Roger's dropping, but that's
What you want.
It's exciting. It's the most. It's a couple years of work. This isn't just like a limited colorway or something. This is us going as crazy as we can.
That's
so I'm excited to see, especially what you gentlemen think of this product.
Okay.
I'll answer any questions, Tony. If you want to jump in to my live right after this, I'll answer any questions that I may have missed. I just rare to get you guys on camera, and I wanted to make sure people got to hear words from your brilliant minds.
Appreciate
Thank you, Roger. Thank you.
I would love to ask you guys a quick question that came up in a conversation yesterday, actually, if you have a few more minutes.
Yeah, of course.
And actually it was during Frenchie's panel. We had several scientists and chemists talking about the science of THC. And one thing that came up was the idea that like there's such thing as like too many terpenes, or that when they get too hot, it can be a bad thing. Like, can we just dab all day? What do you recommend in terms of kind of the consumption of these products, or do you have any best practices?
Let me take that one. I want to just say this. I used to dab pure terpenes, not knowing what the safety protocols of that is. And I can say to you now, years later, that maybe wasn't the smartest thing to do. So I can take responsibility of that. And that is also why I don't sell pure terpenes anymore, because I think that there is a volume knob. Right. And I think some people on this panel has seen Spinal Tap. It's like a mockumentary. It's like a documentary that's really funny. And there's a guitar. I'm a guitar player. So there's a guitar player in there, and they have amps that go to 11. Well, the Marshall stack only goes to 10, but theirs go to 11. And so look at terpenes like that. If the flower is 1 to 2% terpenes, and that's your modulation effect, that's your volume and expression on these 31 different receptors that we have identified. Besides CV1 and CV2, there's actually a total of 31. And so if we're talking about full spectrum terpenes, both mono and sesquiterpenes, and we start to turn that up, click, 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 click. And so when you get to extracts, usually rosin and extracts, when you concentrate something at 1, if you did it perfectly and you were able to eliminate all those lipids and waxes and do it perfectly, you would get to a 10-to-1. So if you have 1% terpenes in flower, you would essentially theoretically get to 10% terpenes if you knew what you were doing. If you had 2% terpenes in flower, you could get all the way up to 20%. And there's a couple papers out there since 2015 that came out that I think people should know about. Things like myrcene shouldn't be more than 6.5% concentration in an extract. These things could lead to potential health hazards. And I think that past 20% is something that we shouldn't be going past. Even the flan and all of my extracts now, at some point, we were pushing it to 20%. Most things that I'm making are somewhere between 10 and 15%. And that is because with the lower viscosity oils, the higher terpene profile, that means we're getting very thin type of oils. Like distillate tends to be very thick and you can turn it upside down. But when I started pushing like our jelly sauce and our different extracts, and I was like, wow, I can get all the lipids and waxes and everything out, right? Once you get to, as you increase that volume knob, then the temperature comes down. Most people that dab the flan, when it was 10 and 15%, they take your Puffco, no offense, Roger, they take your Puffco Peak and they use it on red. Every single one of these hash heads use this thing on red. And I was like, if you're going to hit one of them, hit them on blue. Blue for Blue River, right? And they're like, why would I?
Convenient.
Right? And so it's like, it's because the temperature of vaporization point. As we remove the waxes and lipids and we increase the terpenes, the vaporization point, the melting point, the vaporization point comes way down. So we could go to 325 to 450. Whereas when you talked about shatter, that was 650, 700 degrees. We talk about things that are like THC, just pure distillate, that takes 550 to 650 in temperature to actually hit a vaporization point. So when we start talking about things that are rosin based, that are more THCA based, we have a carbon that's released and we have a different vaporization point. And so ultimately, too much terpenes at a certain point floods that vaporization point. Meaning if we go past 20% and you're at 325 to 350, you're gonna combust. You start at that temperature that the consumer is at, you start combusting. So unless somebody creates a device in which can vaporize at 200, 250, 300, there's no point to go past 20% terpenes. And that doesn't exist yet. So if you take something that's 10 or 20% terpenes and you crank and you're hitting it like on green, even green is fairly hot for things that I'm making, or red, it's terrible. Same thing with our carts. We put a low viscosity switch instead of a high viscosity switch because we want people to be able to vaporize this at a much lower temperature. And
well, stay tuned this week, bud.
Well, like I said, until someone, but my point is, it's terrible. If you hit most of my extracts hot, you're going to hit me up and you're going to be like, what the hell are you doing, bro? This is terrible. I'm like, drop it 100 or 200 degrees. And then they write back, wow, this is amazing. But from a health standpoint, I'm going to stick to my guns and not much is ever going to be past 17%. I don't know how you guys feel about it.
Yeah, I mean, terpenes are corrosive, caustic. Some of them, especially alone, can lead to toxicity. We kind of experienced that when we were looking at, shipping botanical terpenes even out to the European market. Cannabis derived wasn't even an option because you couldn't identifying all the terpenes in that essential oil. Some of them would be over the limits where they would allow them and give them the health seal. So, we've started exploring that here, and there's been some papers written about the corrosive and caustic effects and the health hazards of dabbing too high certain terpenes, and also the just just like you were saying, the impacts on flavor and things like that, the more terpenes that are there. And I remember dabbing just those straight clear terpenes, and exhaling nothing, getting full absorption, and understanding the mechanism of how terpenes were aiding in transportation of those molecules into your lungs. But you just need them to aid in transportation. Beyond that, they just don't taste good, and they're potentially harmful. So,
is this something that just exists when you're reintroducing terps, or can this happen naturally with rosin or with BHO?
So if you keep everything at its normal levels, the plant's done a really great job of self-regulating, like Tony was saying, 2 or 3% on the flower. If we extrapolate that and say, okay, well, you're dabbing less concentrate than you are smoking the flower. The oil or the THC content is 4 times as high. You can expect to have terpene content 4 times as high. So 10, 12% terpenes, no problem. It's when you start going really high by maybe doing the separations and things like that, maybe it can be an issue.
Reintroducing. So I'll just real quick on that. Like live. So now that I've been able to mechanically remove all these waxes, and flavonoids are another subject. We'll probably get to it next year. But when you remove, like our live rosin sauces, the refined live rosin sauces, the recent banana cake I did from Fresh Frozen hit 14.5. Nothing is reintroduced.
Yeah.
I'm not reintroduced. Same thing with, jelly sauces and things. Like, people have this misunderstanding that there's a lot of reintroducing happening with us, and we're not reintroducing, because if you're reintroducing, then you're going to boost past this 20%. So it's just breaking it apart and putting it together, or
that's natural self-regulation.
That's it. It's what's in the plant. And so I feel like, just on my experience, and it's interesting because I just did these two vape carts. One, I didn't break it apart and put it back together. And one, we did it at, our refined live rosin sauce, and my jelly sauce is deconstructed and rebuild it. And it boosts the THC level, but it actually drops the terpenes because there's only so much real estate. So like one hits 14.5 naturally, one only hit 10%. And that was through this deconstruction and rebuilding, but I wanted to get more THC in it. So what I found is there's only so much you can squeeze in this little real estate, right? You can't, unless you're reintroducing and you're really boosting. Once you break everything apart, you only got so much to work with, and based on the flower. And I'm not saying that's every flower. Some flowers have 4% terpenes. And so in that case, you got to be a little bit careful because, it's just, there's a threshold, and I just don't think we should go past 20%. And I'm the guy that pushed terps before. So I'm just.
Great to hear from you. That's.
I know Frenchie's smiling over there.
How terpy do you like your extracts, Roger?
What's that?
How terpy do you like your extracts?
I mean, I really like things in their natural state. I prefer the limitations to be of the genetics, not of necessarily post-processing. I think it's one thing when you're doing stuff like Tony's doing, which is really removing out things that aren't useful to us, that, don't fall into a flavor or feeling category. Yep. But I just prefer full spectrum. Like, rosin is great. I am still a believer in BHO and hydrocarbon extractions. I think if done properly, they can be fucking awesome. And I've had absolutely great hydrocarbon extractions this year. But to me, the plants, I believe, going to resist when you try to push it into an extremely unnatural state. Like, it's not going to survive if it has 25% terpenes naturally on its own. I don't think. So I just prefer full spectrum. If you can clean it up a little bit, great. If there's some fats and lipids left, I know there's a ton of flavor in there. So I hope my lungs won't mind over time.